So, це добре. Щось ще? Що? Добрий день, колеги. Чи готові ви?
So, good afternoon, dear colleagues. Hopefully you're ready.
Добрий день. Я дуже рада, що ви нарешті всі
So, good afternoon.
Вітаю з тим, що повітряної тривоги, і нам поки що не вдається переходити в
So, let me tell you just a few words on the administrative aspects. And unfortunately, the interpreters can still hear the music instead of the speaker. Okay, so if we'll have additional air raid alert, we can go to the bomb shelter. So that's if you wish. If not, we would be able to stay in this room and continue. Well, of course, it all depends on the air alert. So all the security measures are in place. All the seats are in place as well. If you want to, you know, to spread them because of the COVID, please do whatever you want, because we always take care about the security aspects. All those colleagues that are not willing to be on the video, to be on the photos, please mark your badges with the red signs, and we'll make sure they're not on the videos and images. So thank you very much, and I'm very happy to see you. And as you can see today, we're having our event at a wonderful place, and I'm really grateful to USAID on Critical Infrastructure Project for assisting us in organizing this event. Hopefully, you'll be engaged with our speakers and you'll find out something new. Just to remind you that all the questions should be addressed during a Q&A panel, because the briefings will take place 10 to 15 minutes. The time is fairly limited, and this year we're having the event for half a year rather than a day and a half because of the security measures. And today we had a conversation with Alexander Volodymyrovich. He's suggesting us to have the next session conducted together with our Polish partners, and the Polish PKI hopefully would be gladly hosting us. So I'd like to pass the floor to John Harris, the representative of the Office of the Economic Development of the USAID mission in Ukraine, for these introductory words. So please, the floor is yours.
Just checking that you can hear me okay. Thank you very much. And it is great to see everyone here in the room, and hello to everyone who is joining online. My name is John Harris, and I'm with USAID's Office of Economic Growth. It is almost a year since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. As Ukraine continues to fight for its freedom and independence, the United States stands with Ukraine to help counter Russia's unprovoked and brutal aggression. In spite of the invasion, Ukraine continues to make important progress on reforms, harmonizing Ukrainian legislation with that of the EU and expanding partnerships with the Euro-Atlantic Alliance. Today's event, focusing on electronic trust services, is important to Ukraine's overall EU integration process. The topic that we are discussing here today is critical to the formation of a modern digital economy and to Ukraine's overall digital transformation. Building a secure digital environment is key to Ukraine's economic and social development. Lack of trust and legal uncertainty make businesses and public bodies hesitant to carry out transactions electronically and adopt new services. Secure, trustworthy, and easy-to-use electronic transactions that encompass digital authentication are vitally important for Ukraine's development and to Ukraine's pathway towards full membership in the EU digital market. Today's event maintains momentum and aligns key cybersecurity stakeholders as they further implement the law on critical infrastructure. I am very pleased that this event has brought together so many stakeholders from so many different backgrounds and perspectives to advance Ukraine's digital priorities and to further Ukraine's EU integration agenda. Over the last 3 years, USAID has helped Ukrainian government partners to harmonize legislation with that of the EU, to reinforce Ukraine's digital transformation, and to strengthen the country's cyber resilience in the face of relentless cyber attacks on digital infrastructure. I was delighted to join Deputy Chair Poti and others recently in Brussels to discuss these topics with the Euro-Atlantic Alliance. The key message from that forum is that your European and North American friends remain united in our support for your cause. It's a great honor to participate in this event, and USAID and the entire US government remain committed to supporting Ukraine's fight against Russian aggression in cyberspace. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Now I'd like to pass the floor. Unfortunately, that's going to be a video recorded statement by Mikhailo Fedorov, and he made a pre-recorded statement. So please take a look at the screen. Greetings to all the participants of the forum. For over a year, we have a full-scale war. We're fighting the aggressor, and at the same time, we continue to develop, to compete with the innovations and to build the most developed country in the world. And we are trying to integrate the EU to have the digital visa-free regime, and the trusted services will make us closer to the joint digital market of the EU. We are also aligning the Ukrainian legislation with the EU. That's the foundation for the further signing of the agreement on mutual recognition of e-trusted services between Ukraine and the EU. Will be the first one, because the EU never had the agreement like that with the third country. We've already recognized the digital signature, and that allows European companies to use the sharing of the documents. So thank you everyone for helping us in developing the digital future for Ukraine. So thank you. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Alexander Puty, the deputy head of the SSCIP. So please, the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues. I'd like to congratulate all of us with the start of the PKI Forum. I'd like to extend words of gratitude to our partners, to USAID, to the people of the United States for supporting our country during the times of war. This is a very significant support. I have met John in Brussels, and the partners have supported the initiatives and the projects that all of our cyber community are introducing in the cyberspace, and more specifically in ensuring the security and safety for electronic trusted services. I can see a new motto of the company, a new motto of the forum, from digital Ukraine to digital single market. It's a very important motto for the further development of Ukraine. And recently, the Ministry of Digital Transformation and SSCIP, as well as other public agencies and the whole community, have made a large step towards the further development of the legislation, technologies, and processes, so that the trusted services would become widely spread and widely used in order to build some trusted digital market in Ukraine. Now, a very significant role is surely played by the security aspects, and we'll raise these aspects during today's forum, more specifically how to provide those changes. And we already have some amendments introduced into the legislation that allow us to move forward. And also they bring some challenges for the private companies offering the trusted services, developing technologies to support those services. There's challenges to public agencies as well as and the ministries and departments that are implementing the policy on trusted services, as well as the safety and security in the field of the services. So these are the challenges we need to work on. And it's very important to have this cooperation and coordination to be on the same page in terms of developing this crucially important electronic trusted services. Once again, I'm very happy to congratulate everyone with the opening of this forum. Hopefully we'll have a very fruitful discussion in between different parties involved in the development of the digital market and the implementation of these new technologies. So thank you very much. Thank you, Alexander Volodymyrovich. And unfortunately, Serhiy Shtapa was unable to participate. That is why the whole parliament will. I've already got a text. So Alexander Fedorenko will be representing the whole of the parliament. So, dear colleagues, very happy to see you at this event. And the modern Ukraine is becoming more and more digital. But any digitalization, it cannot exist without the security aspects in place. Now, the conditions for the further development of digitalization and digital authentication, these can only be possible when we have a national cybersecurity system in place. Now, these are critical elements of providing digital services. We all remember that even before the war, we had a law passed on critical infrastructure. It was signed by the president. Now it's already in place. And thanks to the fact that we managed to adopt this law before the war, I'm grateful to Lilia and to other authors of this law. Now, thanks to that, we were able to protect our critical infrastructure facilities in terms of entitling or providing that with certain passports, with certain mechanisms for the protection of those facilities. So the committee that I worked previously at has passed several laws to increase the number of services to be provided by our country to the citizens of Ukraine. Now, all of them depend on the secure operation of digital authentication and electronic trusted services. And we're already developing a regulation for these areas. That's the Aegis 2 regulation. And hopefully, our permanent member of the committee, Vilma, will provide us with the more detailed information. So I'm happy to congratulate this committee. Unfortunately, the committee has become so digitalized that they are only virtually participating in the meetings. So we continue to develop the rules for the digital market, and the world is changing in terms of the security and cybersecurity, because the challenges that our country is facing, surely the other continents never faced challenges like that. Well, they've predicted different cyber attacks, they've developed different protection mechanisms, but all those hybrid attacks that we've been facing was together with the use of weapons, surely this is something that is not faced by others. And in some cases, we impose fairly strict regulations on cybersecurity, but I have written an article like cyber machine warfare, and I predicted that there will be a time when machines would start to destroy the humanity, unless the humanity will start regulating those machines. And so talking about the AI, which may pose a threat to the human, well, then the countries have to interfere with this issue and to understand if there is a threat to the human or to the state that we need to regulate this issue, whether someone likes it or not. Of course, we're moving closer to the EU, so we have to analyze and to study, in some cases, unpopular decisions that might support the humanity habit to survive. Important element of providing the cybersecurity for critical infrastructure facilities to coordinate the cooperation with the EU and NATO. I'm currently working at the Committee for National Security and Intelligence, so we are dealing with that aspect, with the aspects of security, part of cyber attacks, cyber intelligence, so everything related to kind of military cybersphere. So civilian cybersphere, that's something which is dealt by the Committee of Digital Transformation. So if the Europeans have the experience, we would be happy to learn it. And we are learning it since we are moving closer to the EU. Just yesterday, I had some military colleagues from Latvia and Finland, and they're saying that we are studying your experience, and we understand that a share of their legislation requires changes, and certain aspects they would like to learn from us already. So the importance of cybersecurity as the component of national security is explained by the fact that the cyber attacks and part of hybrid wars are actively used against Ukraine by Russia. Besides, the world has this trend of increasing cyber attacks, their complexity and level of destruction. And this is really a very crucial aspect. Even before the war, I was telling that the first phases would involve surely the use of human and weapons, but this is a war of resources. So sooner or later, those resources will be depleted, and the humanity would go to cyber wars, because these cyber wars, they do not require very significant resources in terms of, small arms or a significant number of personnel, and those following the casualty rates of those Russian orgs. I mean, Russia is burning on the territory of Ukraine up to 800 of these citizens of Russia. And this is the human resources which cannot be, indefinite. But in any ways, this active phase of the cyber war against us, it's always in action, and sooner or later it would become more active. And the issues that we're talking about, these electronic trusted services, the protection of personal data, this is going to be a mainstream in those aspects. That is why we predict an increase in the intensity of interstate counter actions in the cyber domain. There's tools to gather a lot of data, and the use of modern achievements in AI and social engineering has evolved. Earlier it was offline. Now it's kind of a machine AI which learns your likings or dislikes for the sake of targeted advertising of different commodities and goods. But it's a matter of time. And you'll be learned as a human and how you can be impacted. And then the people in control of those AI will have an impact on you.
And that becomes the obvious change in the political structure of our country. One of the provisions of the law that I'm responsible in, and I'm talking about the draft law number 787. Yesterday we had a meeting attended by everybody, all the stakeholders, both from the government as well as NGOs, and this is the law when introduced will be tailed by numerous amendments into various laws and procedures, increasing the ability to protect our information and the critical infrastructure sites, as well as allowing us to identify and prevent cyber attacks. For instance, in Facebook, they asked me whether we are establishing the software registry, and there will be certain registries that would not be allowed to be accessed. But again, I'm talking here only about the state-run institutions, and so the state does have the right to defend and protect its own informational critical infrastructure, whether you like it or not. But the government, in terms of the state-run digital and information systems, the state will keep protecting those, even using not very popular methods. But in terms of our focus would be, of course, the critical sites, those that are instrumental in defending the whole country. But again, we also need to ensure that those sites would be performing, and resilience requires hardware, software, staffing numbers, because right now we have lots of problems with vacancies, and also we need to try to find funds and increase the pay to those people who are practically and instrumentally involved in protecting our critical infrastructure. So hopefully we'll be able to raise their pay in Ukraine. So lots of things to focus on, involving both the civil society, governments, and the parliamentarians. So I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us to discuss all the relevant issues. And separately, I would like to thank the USAID project for your continuous support, for helping to arrange this event, and for being truly supportive to our team. These are sincere appreciations from me, because regardless what challenges we had in our digital transformation committee, we always felt that the USAID project was close by, basically helping us to go through those difficult challenges of legislative changes, and helped us to communicate with the EU structures, helping us to compare whether our norms comply with the European legislation. And this approximation of our laws have been highly evaluated in terms of the efforts that the SSCP and others stakeholders have spent on the digital transformation and trusted services. Yeah, after COVID, my brain has been defragmented, and of course, I'm referring here to what I've already said, that we are grateful for your support, for being here, and I want to wish all of us to bring the victory closer. I will stay for a while here, so please attract me if you have any questions. Thank you, and thank you for kind words to the hosts, because that's always a pleasure to get such a feedback. But hopefully soon enough we'll get a present from you guys in the form of the registry of the sites of critical infrastructure. Hopefully we'll learn some more later on about this. But another welcoming remark: all 10 years of the existence of this PKI forum, he attended all of the meetings, our task force actor. He was the technical push-up of that whole process. Yuri Kozlov, deputy acting director of DIA company. So welcoming speech from him, and In the second session, he would be a key note presenter of what dear findings we have now. Thank you, Lila, and I would like to join the welcoming words of my colleagues and peers. It's a pleasure to be back to this event. For many years now, we are working closely with the organizers, so it's always a pleasure to see so many familiar faces in this room. And what we have initiated 10 plus years ago might look a bit naive and simplified now, but at that time, we felt that we are tackling quite complicated issues from legal and technological standpoint, because I remember how we found ourselves in a state of shock when on the 24th of December 2012, the certificate uh, ran out, the validity of the certificates was running out, and I thought that that's the end of all of the electronic services. All the state unified registries would not allow any access, because without digital authentication signature, it will just not be operational. But we found strength to overcome that challenge. And when I'm trying to compare what we had then with all the intense tasks that we have now, and I receive this feedback on social media, and I can compare that back 10, 12 years ago, we lacked all the tools in our tool set, and at that time, all we could do is to try to find a like-minded people who would help to save this infrastructure from being ruined, and we succeeded. At that time in Ukraine, we had about 20,000 certificates issued nationwide, and we were proud that we managed to maintain all of them, and they're still operational. In my keynote presentation, I'll share some statistics with you, some figures, but we are now working with hundreds of thousands, millions of certificates on digital signatures and trusted services. So thousands of certificates are being disqualified every day. And but again, it takes just 1 month to go through this whole procedure. But back then, 10 years ago, we could choose still which alternative path of development of our system to choose. And back in 2012, we all felt quite a strong pressure from our today's enemy, the then our eastern northern partner. This neighbor was treating us haughtily. They didn't believe that Ukraine would have enough capabilities in terms of our academia and our technical capabilities to build such infrastructure in place. They came to our fora, they told us how they come up with their own systems. They asked us to visit them and suggested that we will come up with a joint certification center for both countries, and will recognize the digital signatures. And at that time, we found ourselves at the crossroads, and all the processes that were happening back in 2013 and here in Ukraine, lots of people from that community are still present here in this room, and I'm grateful to you for choosing the right path at those crossroads, namely going towards Europe, towards EU standards. And finally, we are reached the stage of trusted services, digital signature, digital authentication, and sometimes even our colleagues are a bit surprised when they were our teachers and mentors before, but now Ukraine and our findings, our technological solutions could be already exported by us as a product. So the number of trusted services, the number of transactions, and all in all, the use of the identification and authentication and qualified digital signature services. Nobody has such as many services in their country. In Europe, only China has more services, but they have so many more people, residents there. So basically, we can be proud of achieving so much when we compare our capabilities now and back then. In the time of war, people who became refugees, who fled the country, saving their lives, and we're talking to them, and the feedback from them is this, that electronic services and banking services, e-banking services that are based on our local technological solutions, well, they are not being used in the EU. And regardless whether it's just a European resident or a civil servant in any EU country, they just don't have access to those electronic services that we're used to already. When we attend similar events in the EU and when we hear from them that the EU is launching some new technological initiative, there are some tangible results already. They call it electronic digital wallet, ID wallet. Yeah, we'll be talking about this. So let me tell you this much. We had ID wallet in Ukraine 3 years back. That's DIA mobile application. And when we show them how it's already working, we tell them, boys and girls, we have everything up and running, so come to us, study our standards. Here's the general model, how to go through the certification process. That's how to get to the international knowledge database, and you can always expect our support and assistance. Thank you. Thanks a lot, colleagues, for always supporting us. And that's what I always claim at any level, especially at the highest state level. Our community becomes the best example of private-public partnership, because some people might think that this is something brand new for Ukraine, but no, we are operating in this environment for 10 years now, and this community that deal with electronic identification and electronic trusted services can already be proud of some of the joint achievements. I'm grateful for those welcoming speeches, and now I give the floor to our moderator, General Poti, and we'll start our first session. And I would kindly ask the keynote speakers to come here, Danila Milkovsky, Volodymyr Kozak, among others. So once again, thank you, gentlemen. Hopefully you'll be able to stay with us until the end of this event. Alexander, the floor is yours. So, according to the agenda, we also have Viktor Anaprienko, who is joining us. So, while we have some technical arrangements to deal with, let me present to you the first panelists, the panelists of the first session. But first of all, let me just outline the topics that we're going to be discussing in this session. So we heard now about this draft law on the protection of critical infrastructure, and we are coming up with a score of procedures and guidelines to as part of this legislative process, and we recognize how relevant this is because the shellings of our critical infrastructure sites requires us to make them resilient. And we have the information that the first sites of the critical infrastructure have been already approved by the cabinet of ministers. And this list of those sites includes those who render digital services, especially if they're qualified as critical services. So those providers now should also think hard how to ensure the protection of their sites being qualified as the critical information infrastructure sites. So during today's discussions, we hopefully would be able to discuss this important topic because there are some project threats, some challenges of protecting the data on those sites, how to meet those conditionalities, how to harmonize them with with the requirements coming from our partners, etc. Another important issue here deals with the further development of the electronic trusted services and the protection of critical information sites is how to develop the set of requirements for such protection. And the position of the SSS is to move forward the lines what the cybersecurity framework documents outlined that prepared by the US MIST. And one of the important components there would be the statement that there are 5 functions: identifications of the assets that need to be protected, the implementation of the cyber protection activities. The third component, identifying the attacks and incidents on the sites and in the systems. Next function is reacting to such cyber attacks and cyber threats. And the fifth, last stage, is recovery after the cyber incidents and attacks. So those 5 functions have to be carried out at such sites that are to be protected. And we have already outlined those 5 functions in the guidelines approved by the Cabinet of Ministers procedure on the protection of cyber protection of such sites, including the sites that are the providers of electronic trusted services. Another important element there is identifying, reacting, and recovery after the attacks by using the mobile response teams. Every time when I'm attending similar events, workshops, and roundtable discussions with the partners, especially when we discuss systematically how to build this system, I always claim that we need to have 3 components: people, technologies, and processes in place. So talking about people, an important aspect is building trusted relations and the trust in what we're doing. When we talk about how we organize the work, all the work processes, then the important consideration here is how mature those work processes are. And the third component, technologies, it's important that they are efficient. And we have selected keynote speakers on those 3 components. So Danila Melkovsky is the director of the Department of Cybersecurity, the department whose job is to come up with the cybersecurity policy for the whole country. That's the main task of his department.
So he basically defines the major policies of Ukraine on how the communities cooperate between one another so that there would be shared rules and everyone played by those rules. Now, without the trust, that's impossible. And the department deals with building that trust within our society, though. Then we'll have another briefing about the certification and the compliance assessment of the electronic trusted services and other systems, and the in future for the cyber protection systems, and we'll have Volodymyr Kozak, he's the director for the State R&D Institute for Cybersecurity. So he's the one responsible for developing the certification in those areas. Now, this is exactly what defines the maturity of the processes for the development of the system, for its operation and its further on assessment, so that these certification processes would be recognized in the European countries and in the world. So building the interaction of those components within the certification bodies and the certification laboratories, that's what I'm talking about. Now, the third component, which is very, very important, that's technologies. Now, in that respect, it's important to have the effectiveness and the efficiency. So here we have the third panelist, Viktor Onoprienko is the general director of the company, which is designing and implementing the technologies, including in the field of electronic trusted services. And these are effective technologies. These are exemplary in terms of the quality of their preparation and implementation. And the company has a significant experience in implementing those technologies, just like other companies in Ukraine. So we have this component for the trust, for building the right policies for communities to cooperate in this area. There is the component for developing and mature and high quality processes. And then there is this component for developing and implementing those technologies. So these are the major sort of topics for the panelists to cover. And I'd like them to concentrate on those issues. And of course, please pay attention to the timeframes allocated. So thank you. Now, our first speaker will be Danilo Mialkovsky, and he'll have a briefing on the rules that I've already mentioned. So thank you, Alexander. Thank you to the organizers who invited me once again to participate in this forum. And big thanks to everyone involved in the protection of our country, as well as to the people of US and the government of US for supporting our country. And the support is really enormous. Without that, we wouldn't be gathering in this room. And thank you for allowing me to be as practical as possible. So this functional body in the field of the protection of the cybersecurity infrastructure. So I'll talk also about the roles, structures, and the reason for me selecting this briefing, because we have this law on critical infrastructure. So that's the first thing. And then the EU has passed a series of innovations. I mean, take a look at our legislation on electronic trusted services and the fundamentals on critical infrastructure of 2017. I mean, all of them were elaborated based on the IDOS and other EU regulations. We were working with the draft, and also they were used while preparing the draft laws. So we were basing our work based on the NIST. So the EU has introduced amendments to the legislation on the protection of critical infrastructure. That's the replacement of the Directive 114. So they have a new directive now, which is called NIS2. Now, why is that interesting to us? Because we are, while developing the legislation and fundamentals of cybersecurity, we had to develop the criteria for categorizing the critical infrastructure facilities. We did this, and in 2021, we had two regulations of the Cabinet of Ministers in October, one on identification of critical infrastructure facilities, and the other on some aspects of critical information infrastructure. Now, as the result, we went further ahead of the EU So I'll try to be in line with the presentations. And here's this list of documents. Well, you can see just the lines of the text. This is not for you to read, but just to tell you about the work. So when we finalized the work on establishing these sectors for the critical infrastructure, we focused on the fact that NIS2 is being prepared. And then there is this providers of electronic trusted services, and there is also qualified services, and they should be part of the sectors of the informational technology. So the legislation, it continuously develops, and we have a lot of documents being modernized and recreated, so to say, but we have to make sure we are moving stably ahead. We are implementing the EU legislation and becoming really a part of the European scope of trust. Now, the tasks of the administration of the SSCIP under the Lee law, they were increased as a functional agency that we were started to be called after the introduction of the law. We were called now the functional agency in the field of cyber protection. So we are playing this role as policymakers. Now, the tasks that you can see, meaning the establishment of the national policy, state control, audit, technical regulation in the field of cyber protection. Now, in 2018, or in 2019, we have prepared a Cabinet of Ministers resolution on the general requirements for cyber protection of critical infrastructure facilities. And that regulation stayed for some time. And some of the potential critical infrastructure facilities fulfilled the requirements it mentioned. And then we started sort of having comprehensive modernization. One of the major tasks was to have a review of the legislation on cyber protection. So, which are the innovations under NIS2? It revokes the article dealing with the requirements to the providers of electronic trusted services. Now, instead, there is all the providers of the electronic trust services, they have to comply with the requirements to the operators of essential services, meaning the digital service providers. That is, well, digital service providers. That's how it's called in Ukraine. So I would suggest using this translation. There are obligatory requirements on informing the response teams on any incidents, and the use of European systems of certification, which is provided by the European Cybersecurity Act of 2020, or maybe 2019. But in any case, it came into power and it identified the different procedures for the certification processes enacted in the EU. So these are the main sort of requirements. Now, looking at our sort of mechanism of the requirements in 2019, these are security requirements, the qualified providers of electronic trusted services, and Ukraine started in the very beginning by regulating the accredited or centers for providing keys, and now they're called disqualified providers of electronic trusted services. So it's being all developed. For some time it's been controlled, for sometimes not, but in the whole process we've seen some of the challenges that we might be facing. I was surprising that we required qualified providers of the qualified trusted services. We required them to have some special hardware. On the other hand, we had some requirements to security for those qualified providers of electronic trusted services. So that was the first sign that allowed us to come up with the approach when there is a risk management framework that where you can find the way how it's implemented within the regulation, that by introducing comprehensive information protection system to cover the management system for the assets available. On the other hand, our security requirements to the qualified service providers, they sort of allowed to add some procedures and to give a chance to elaborate those security incidents of the qualified services and security of providing electronic trusted services. So the annual report of NISA, it shows that they clearly divide risk management framework and security incident management. So they believe it's kind of a separate scopes. Now they're preparing their reports in this way. So considering a lot of those threats and incidents, and there's constant analysis of the process continues. So indeed, in 2018, we had some regulations on introducing the security requirements to the providers of electronic trusted services. There's major roles, major obligations. So at that time, this issue allowed to refocus kind of attention not only at this service provider, but also on making sure these requirements are being complied with, and to ensure some level of control over the incidents that might take place in there. So thank you. I found a wonderful report on the number of certificates being provided, and we can see the champions, or let's say those at the front lines. And I have to apologize to Alexander Volodymyrovich for the word. I was the author of this mistake. So we've signed the list of the critical infrastructure facilities. It's been submitted for the consideration. So we basically have it. Now we need to solve the technological aspect, and hopefully the government will be able to approve this. There's a joke about this. When Sarah and Moisei are going down the mountain, and it says, okay, I got two news for you. One, it's a good news, the other is bad. Where should I start? With the good news. Well, there's only 10 commandments. What's the bad news? Well, too much of of loving around. That's a theme. So this report helped us a lot. You will be able to see that. So that's our kind of activity outline. We're developing the legislation now. What should we do with what should the critical infrastructure facility do with that? So there's a need to find a place for those in our technical model. So let me try to underline you something, to show you something. Okay. So we're currently located at the object level, but it's under the pressure, which is the lowest level. But on the other hand, we're sort of under pressure, or rather in close cooperation with this three-layered pie in the middle, which is the national infrastructure of cybersecurity. That's the first layer. That's industrial technical infrastructure and object infrastructure. This is where we were. This is where we're working at. It's important to understand because we are coming to the task to generate the documents ensuring the fulfillment of the service function of SSCIP, meaning we're going to give a fishing road to fish the recommendations for themselves somewhere. For example, responding to cyber attacks or cyber incidents, what has to be there in the plan or in some of the documents. So we'll be discussing that, we'll be implementing that. Therefore, this work of ours, it would be related with clearly understanding the role of any entity and the documents we're developing for that. As I've said, responding to cyber incidents, I mentioned only the response plan, but still I'd like to some kind of raise your mood and by saying that last year we've been developing the draft regulation of the Cabinet of Ministers. Now, this year we've already kind of coordinated that, and we have these 4 stages of responding to cyber incidents. There will be obligatory stages, and every entity has to kind of dwell upon them in their own critical infrastructure facility. And one more thing, it's in law, and the other thing, it's in our apartments and critical infrastructure, critical facility infrastructure for ourselves. Now, the changes in the regulation of Cabinet of Ministers 1109, the changes in the critical infrastructure. So there were the provision of trusted services and stayed the same, or just some minor challenges. So this trusted service, this sector of the critical infrastructure, it was like that, and it stays like that. And now you'll be able to watch this presentation. I'll try to speed up. We have the procedure for defining the list of the facilities. Now, we've introduced an innovation. We have created a cybersecurity framework, which is based on the publication of national standards and technologies. That's the Department for Cyber Incidents Management. We read it. We took kind of a chart, which is recommended by CISA out of it. And back in 2021, we have implemented the cybersecurity framework. Now we have complete symmetric approach, and you can see there is the similar list of activities and steps to be taken at certain facilities in order to. Well, there's not too many activities on the 108, but all of them are available, and they'll be used to assess the success. So we'll be modernizing all of them. And I also would like to focus your attention saying that there would be a common denominator for us to set the conditions as well as to do the assessment of the conditions of cybersecurity. So the first year, we're going to do that for the first time. And on September, we'll have to show the result for the consideration of the Verkhovna Rada and for the consideration of the CNSDU. So we are actively ready for that. We are introducing the assessments on implementing the cybersecurity frameworks. So it's going to be a simplified form that shows the attitude of the planned activities towards the overall number of activities in all the categories of events. And at this point, it's going to be easier for you to come up with the common picture. And we believe there could be practice, criteria, and truth. But this is the approach that we're going to use, like a similar to all the types for identifying the current condition of the cyber threat. Or in that case, there will be enterprise willing to increase its level of cyber protection. So that's the briefing. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for not falling asleep. So dear colleagues, should you have any questions, we have 1 more minute. Now, in terms of the briefing, just wanted to say that SSCIP is coming up with some significant innovations, but the major trend is the fact that we are willing to integrate as much as possible and to harmonize our legislation with the legislations of EU and US so that we would have a common understanding. Even these categories, they remained the same as they are for the EU countries and the United States.
That's why our agency, SSCIP, is very proactive with our international partners. We have the arrangement reached with NIST, the National Institution of the US. Following their copyright, we would be able to implement similar approaches in Ukraine, and we're drafting similar memorandum with the ENISA, the European agency. And as part and parcel of this draft memo that we're working on, hopefully we'll be able to get additional capabilities and opportunities and recommendations provided by NISA to use them, practically speaking. And here, the huge role would be of that of our ecosystem that will include academia, governments, and non-government institutions, thus entering the marketplace with the proposals as to how to consult the critical infrastructure sites on how to implement those approaches, how to carry out compliance audits, assessments, self-assessments. The marketplace itself provides recommendations and shapes the way to meet the cybersecurity arrangements. These documents are open, and I'm in great support of the trend of the private companies increasing their capabilities and creating a separate niche on the markets like they did in the EU and the US. And thus, it's important that looking forward, and we have 4 categories of critical infrastructure sites, and if the categories 1 and 2, they will compulsory have to carry out such audits and assessments, while the sites from categories 3 and 4 would be able to conduct self-assessments. But to run a self-assessment, you still need private sector experts who would come up with the guidelines, methodologies, carry out such assessment, provide recommendations on how to improve cybersecurity on those sites. So those innovations that the triple SCAP is drafting as we speak, they are focused not only on shaping and the set of those conditions and being able to oversee whether those conditions are being met. But also, it's important for us to start create the market for the services of assessors, evaluators, who run compliance projects and provide narrow subject matter recommendations on how to improve the cyber security arrangements. And that's another task of ours, to shape the workforce markets. Again, that was my side comment, but anytime you want to discuss any additional issues, please raise them later on, because now we have Mr. Kozak, the keynote speaker, who would be handling the issue of the evaluation of compliance in the sphere of electronic trusted services. I am from the State Scientific Research Institute on Cyber Security and Technologies of Information Protection. We are under the umbrella of the triple SCAP. Here are my contact data, and if we ran out of questions and answers session and you would still have some outstanding questions, then please make sure you contact me directly. Now, what's the compliance evaluation is all about? It clearly states that those who provide trusted services in the third countries acknowledge and accept them to be legally equal if those services meet the compliance requirements for digital trusted services providers in the particular country. So what are those conditions and requirements? We have Article 32 of our law. In ELDAS, that's Article 20, actually. But almost verbatim, it says that any provider of trusted services every 24 months should pay for going through the compliance review. So the compliance evaluation authority will be either a legal entity or a department within some legal entity that has approved professional track record, is being unbiased, and being accredited in an EU country, or in our case, in the National Agency for Accreditation of Ukraine. The accreditation schematic is exactly the same, identical, in Ukraine and EU. That's the standard 1725 on certification of goods, products, and services, and ETN 379 413 standard, which is the compliance in the sphere of trusted services. So both in EU and in Ukraine, this compliance assessment authority is basically identical because we follow the same standards. It's just that in Ukraine, we follow the national standard, which has been basically cut and paste documents. So why our institute has been involved in the first place? Well, taking into consideration that having such compliance evaluation authority in place requires substantial costs, and I don't see any private company that would be willing to play the role of such authority. The institute, under this receiving the advice from the Ministry of Digital Transformation and the SSCAP, and we have been working on this for 18 months already, and without even counting salaries, we spent 3 million hryvnias from our budget. We conducted training for the auditors. We have 4 compliance auditors already who are currently auditing trusted services in the countries like Vietnam and Thailand. Now our experts, together with our partners, are evaluating the compliance in Slovak Republic. So we went through a long and tough bidding procedure. Taylor Cox, Czech company, became the bid winner. It's being accredited in the EU as a compliance assessment authority to deal with almost all of our services. In addition to this, the Ministry of Digital Transformation tries to intensify the process of compliance assessment in the digital identification area, and something that should be done before the accreditation. We have filed the paperwork for accreditation already. So the status now, the institute filed the application to be accredited as the compliance assessment authority. Probably before the accreditation, we will be allowed to start conducting the compliance assessment. But actually, we are almost ready to go through accreditation procedure. Currently, in Ukraine, in terms of the requests to conduct such compliance assessments, reviews, so far, no requests were filed, but sooner or later they'll come to us. We have no competition here, so probably in 10 or 20 years' time, somebody will be found among the private sector players who would start playing this role. But there is 319, 413 standard in place. The state national standards of Ukraine, enumerating the requirements for the compliance assessment authority. That is to say, the requirements to us, how we need to arrange the process of compliance assessment review, how the application is filed, how we go through processing it, etc. All the logistics. Now, what are we being assessing? What services are being provided by the compliance assessment authority in compliance with 319/413/2 standard, or more often we use another standard, which is 411. There are also some other standards that are linked to the standard 411 on the profile of the certificate and other requirements. You're all well aware of it. 129 standards, a very important one, a checklist, basically, the list of questions you need to respond to in order to go through this compliance assessment review. So this checklist allows you to understand how the EU goes through such assessment. Authority in the EU that are dealing with the compliance assessments, and we've been involved with trusted services, compliance assessment reviews, and the third parties that try to introduce those services, and we'll start applying those standards in Ukraine when we will have the authority in place that will be authorized to conduct such compliance assessment reviews in the first place. So there's 319/411 standard, and there's another one, 2161 as well. So these are the requirements. And the previous slide showed to you which standards the services should follow. And it seems like there should be some devices that are being used to provide digital services. 419/211 standards covers those requirements, and since it was approved by the cabinet ministers, it's compulsory in Ukraine. There's additional order from our agency on the use of cryptographic algorithms. So we have 419, 201, and 241 standards. The standards that cover the ability to use crypto modules in trusted environment. That is to say, if you assess the whole environment, well, standard 241 outlines the requirements to the keys that are being stored at the server, and 211 standard covers the same keys, but stored not at the servers, but like crypto modules. Our institute plans to conduct certification of such crypto modules, but for the time being, we have a compulsory mechanism of conducting state expertise on cryptographic protection using the 211 series of standards, while 241 and they have not been covered in that resolution of the cabinet ministers, and that's what we're going to be doing in the nearest future. That's all I planned to cover with you guys. Thank you for your attention, and if you want to ask me direct questions now or offline later on privately, please contact me using the email address I left here. Colleagues, any questions from you? Well, then let me start with a question myself. So, Volodymyr Fedorovich, this compliance assessments review, is it compulsory in Ukraine already, or Well, the law is written in such a way that only the Constitutional Court could interpret it whether it's compulsory or not. Because even now, the law states that every 24 months, every provider of electronic services must conduct the compliance assessment review. But the provision before that says that if that site has already received the previous review, but how can you become part of the process if you had no chance before? So even though we have no authority that would be responsible for such reviews in place. So for the time being, we can only use the EU authorities, but in the nearest future, hopefully it would be possible here with us. But whether it's compulsory or not, like I said, it would depend on the cabinet ministers and the triple SCAP, because the task for the government now is to create the comprehensive information protection system, while the compliance assessment is something looking forward when we're joining the Europe. I mean, we are claiming that we're ready to start this procedure because one way or another, the Institute could both provide the expertise on the comprehensive system of information protection and in parallel conduct all those events for the trusted services providers in preparation for such reviews, because the sooner we start, the earlier we'll be done with this. We are ready. As to the community, whether you are ready, well, then that's my next question, which might be interested to the audience. What are the best practices in the EU now? Whether those authorities have to compulsorily conduct those reviews? No, they will not be included on the trusted list, because if you failed to pass the compliance review once every 2 years, then you will be disqualified from the list of the trustees. So this list was designed when we didn't have capabilities to conduct such compliance assessment reviews. Now we need just to add some wording that would say that we gave some timeline for people to go through this review. So as soon as we have this official accreditation authority in place, responsible for compliance assessment reviews, that would be the high time for us to modify our legislation, approximating it with the relevant EU norms. Yeah, just make this Article 32 operational, because even though the law does contain this article, but initially everybody was included on the trusted list without going through the compliance assessment review, and it's a vicious circle. They're already there, but they might not go through the review themselves. Well, we know, and probably operators of the trusted services would be interested to know how much would it cost to go through this review. So ballpark figure in Europe, how much does it cost? It's a confidential information based, actually. And I do have certain information. There is the Compliance Assessment Authorities Association that covers more than a half of such authorities in the EU, and Ukraine now needs their document, which is the time standards to conduct the compliance assessment review. And it's a bit expensive if you follow them. The timeline is the same, but experts in Europe are being paid much more than here in Ukraine, and we did sign the agreement with the European Compliance Assessment Authority, and we plan to sign similar agreements with our authority, so that the key assessor would be from the EU. And how long do you want such an expert to go through your paperwork? Well, if you give that person the full day, you pay for the full day. If it could be done in half a day, well, you pay for half a day. But between 100 to 200,000 hryvnias approximately. There is the resolution of the cabinet ministers on the pricing on such reviews, the number of experts multiplied by the hours, multiplied by the pay per one expert. And then it would depend on the size of that review. And you can just have a look and put all the minuses in this checklist and be done in half a day. But everybody has to go through the review, and you can find somebody cheaper in Europe than we have here because it's all accessible.
Okay, so let me draw a summary. We are moving towards the European mechanisms for the compliance assessment. And surely you all know that, well, Ukraine is moving towards the EU, and therefore we have to comply with the requirements of the EU market, whether we are willing to do that or no. But the providers of the electronic trusted services would need to join the compliance assessment in accordance to the EU regulations and standards. So we need to get prepared for those mechanisms and procedures, and don't think or don't hope that it will pass somewhere around us, because there's certain accreditors, there's certain certification procedure, and there will be kind of grounds for introducing changes into the legislation so that the compliance assessment procedure would be just the same procedure as required to the for the electronic trusted service providers in the EU. We've heard the introductory briefing by the Vice Prime Minister Fedorov, and you know that we recognize the qualified digital services of the EU and Ukraine. So our operators and the providers of electronic trusted services would need to be prepared for running the compliance assessment. And I believe that if these would be the national agencies and the national companies to deal with that, in this case, for subjective reasons, the pricing would be more competitive if compared to the service providers of a similar nature from the European countries. You know the reason, but you need to get prepared for this. And hopefully you've heard this from the briefing that the SSCIP took those expenditures so that the first accreditation body to be established in order to have this infrastructure. But we are looking at the response of the market, whether the private companies or other R&Ds would be able to, would have the same possibilities. Now, let me introduce the third speaker, Viktor Onoprienko, the CEO of the Institute of Informational Technologies, and he will have a briefing on new technological solutions on the market of electronic trusted services. Some of the challenges that the company is tackling or is currently solving with the rest of the market players for the benefit of Ukraine and our citizens. So, Victor, please, I'll pass the floor, I pass the microphone to him. So there was a question in the chat, what's the possible kind of cost of the services? Well, I've told you that's 100, maybe 200,000 hryvnia. Maybe you haven't heard us in Zoom. Just wanted to make a small announcement that we're going to have a break, and you will see the video that we've already seen in the room, and we'll reconvene with you at 16:40. That's for those staying with us online. And